Your neighbor knows things about your cat that you don't. They know what time the meowing starts. They know how long it lasts. They know which days are worse. They've heard things through the wall that you will never hear, because you're never there when they happen. Most cats look completely normal the moment you walk back through the door, calm, maybe a little curious, acting like nothing happened, which, from their perspective, nothing did. But you've seen the evidence. The pillow knocked onto the floor, the edge of the curtain that wasn't hanging like that this morning. The very specific silence of a cat who knows something is different about the atmosphere when you walked in. You assumed it was boredom, maybe curiosity, maybe just a strange day, but behavioral researchers have been doing something for decades that most owners haven't. They leave a camera running, walk out and watch. And what those cameras capture, hour by hour, heartbeat by heartbeat, is one of the most revealing findings in animal psychology. Your cat isn't just missing you when you're gone. Something specific is happening in their brain, and it starts before you even close the door. In 2010, researchers at the University of Milan installed cameras in the homes of 23 cats and left. Vocalization, meowing, yowling, restless pacing began at an average of 3 minutes and 15 seconds after departure. Destructive behavior within 7 minutes, that's how long it takes before the houseplants are at risk. But the more interesting finding was what came after. That first frantic phase, the meowing, the scratching at the door, gradually subsides. And from the outside, if you came home to a quiet apartment and nothing visibly destroyed, you'd assume the cat had settled. It hadn't. What the cameras showed was that as vocalization decreased, grooming increased. Heart rate stayed elevated. The cat had shifted from one expression of distress to a different one. The noise stopped, but the physiological activation didn't. And researchers tracking behavior over longer periods found something even more telling. The pattern doesn't follow a clean decline. Every 23 to 28 minutes, there's a new spike, a renewed burst of movement or vocalization, followed by a quieter period, then another spike. Not settling, cycling, the silence between those spikes is not calm. Now compare that to what cameras capture in cats without separation, related issues. Swedish researchers at the University of Agricultural Sciences left this group alone for up to 4 hours. These cats spent approximately 97% of their time in passive behavior, lying down, resting, occasionally checking the food bowl. Not distressed, not bored, just relaxed, waiting. The difference between those two groups isn't breed, it isn't age, and it's barely even about genetics. The research points to one variable above almost all others, what the cat has been taught to expect. But before getting there, think about what happens before you even leave. In the 1980s, veterinary behaviorists Borchelt and Voith documented something that has been confirmed repeatedly since. Cats with separation anxiety often begin showing measurable stress responses while their owner is still in the house. Not when the door closes, before the bag even comes out. Through simple conditioning, cats learn to chain your entire departure routine backwards. You check your phone, you put on your shoes, you glance at the time. Each of those actions, repeated hundreds of mornings in a row, has become a signal, and the signal means one thing. I'm about to be alone. By the time you reach the door, some cats are already overgrooming, some are pacing, some are following you from room to room, like they know exactly what's coming and are hoping somehow that this time you'll stay. There's a practical implication here that challenges a lot of popular advice. The standard recommendation for years has been to desensitize your cat to departure cues. Pick up your keys randomly throughout the day, put on your shoes, and then sit back down so those cues lose their meaning. Researchers at the Universität at Autónoma de Barcelona reviewed this in 2014 and found the evidence more complicated than expected. Making departures unpredictable doesn't always reduce fear. For some cats, it increases it, because the problem isn't the keys. The problem is the uncertainty about what happens after you go. Your cat isn't afraid of your shoes. They're afraid you won't come back. The Royal Veterinary College ran a longitudinal study called Generation Pup, adapted later for companion animals more broadly, tracking young pets from adoption through their first 6 months of life. They were specifically looking for what predicted separation-related problems, and they found something that surprised a lot of trainers. Emotional goodbyes didn't cause it. Long farewells, big hugs at the door, the whole 5-minute routine some people do every morning had no significant effect. What mattered was the return. Cats whose owners came home to find damage and responded with visible frustration, raised voices, prolonged reactions, that visible anger directed at the cat, were far more likely to develop separation-related behaviors. The cat doesn't connect your frustration to the flower pot it knocked over 4 hours ago. There's no chain of causation available to them over that time window. What the cat connects your frustration to is your arrival. And gradually, your arrival becomes something to brace for, and here's why that matters. A cat that's anxious about you coming home is a cat that's more anxious about you leaving. The two ends of the absence get linked. You walk out, they panic. You walk back in, they panic again, for different reasons. The whole day becomes a loop of anticipatory stress. The same study found that early use of punishment, yelling, spraying water, even deliberately ignoring, significantly increased the probability of separation problems developing. And the most common piece of advice owners receive when their cat struggles alone: get a second cat. It has almost no support in the research. A 2021 study of multi-cat households found that anxious cats often vocalize just as much, sometimes more, when left alone with another cat in the home. Because the separation isn't about loneliness in the general sense. It's about the specific absence of a specific person. A second cat doesn't fix that. It just means 2 cats in the apartment, both reacting differently. Somebody's neighbor is having a very long week. This is the part that gets missed most often, and it tends to get missed because the cat makes it easy to miss. You come home, the apartment is intact. No mess, no damage. Maybe your cat looks up from the windowsill with an expression that says nothing in particular happened. You assume everything was fine. In the 1960s, Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania ran a series of experiments that would become foundational to psychology. Animals were exposed to unavoidable stress. Later, when escape was possible, many of them didn't try. They simply accepted what was happening. He called it learned helplessness, the idea that organisms stop acting when experience teaches them that their actions don't change outcomes. In a major revision of that theory in 2016, Seligman acknowledged he'd framed it backwards. Passivity isn't something animals learn. Passivity is the brain's default when it's under prolonged, inescapable stress. What has to be actively built is the belief that behavior can change the situation. A cat that stops meowing after an hour alone hasn't necessarily accepted the situation. It may have stopped believing that its behavior matters. And there's a more recent layer to this. A 2019 study found that in severely anxious cats, long-term cortisol, measured from hair samples reflecting months of hormonal accumulation, was sometimes lower than in calmer cats. Not because they were less stressed, because their stress system had been running so long, it had started to burn out. The data suggested that a cat that seems completely fine might actually be the cat you need to worry about most. Here's something that rarely gets mentioned outside veterinary research and should. In 2019, a team at Linköping University in Sweden measured long-term cortisol levels in pet owner pairs. Not the cortisol spike of a bad moment, the slow hormonal accumulation over weeks and months, captured in hair samples. The levels were synchronized: stressed owner, stressed cat; calm owner, calm cat. When the research looked at the direction of that relationship, which one was driving the other, the answer was clear. The owner's cortisol was predicting the cat's, not the reverse. What this means is that a cat already carrying a chronically elevated stress baseline doesn't start the separation from neutral. They start it from a deficit. The 8 hours you're gone aren't happening in isolation. They're happening on top of everything that's already accumulated. The product industry around separation anxiety is enormous. Pheromone diffusers, calming treats, anxiety wraps, white noise machines. Most owners have tried at least one of them. Most owners will tell you the results were somewhere between modest and nothing. And that's because most of them are treating the 8 hours the owner is gone. The actual point of intervention is the other 16. Let's be specific about the evidence. Cat-appeasing pheromone diffusers showed no significant improvement in vocalization, scratching, overgrooming, or heart rate in the most rigorous placebo-controlled studies. The television left on all day, no measurable effect versus silence. Puzzle feeders provide minutes of engagement. For severely anxious cats, they can backfire entirely. Once the food is gone, the cat notices you're gone, and the real reaction begins. What does have consistent evidence is graduated exposure, not leaving for 5 minutes and hoping for the best. Starting with seconds, walking to the door, coming back in, touching the handle, coming back in, building a history of return so incrementally that the cat's nervous system has no chance to spike. It feels absurdly slow. Standing at your own front door for 30 seconds and then coming back inside doesn't feel like training. It feels like nothing. But what you're doing isn't teaching obedience. You're providing enough repetitions of the same sequence, you leave, you come back, that the cat's prediction system starts to update. Practitioners who use this approach consistently report the same tipping point. Once a cat can tolerate roughly 40 minutes of absence without distress, progress to 4 or 8 hours tends to follow relatively quickly. The 40-minute mark isn't special. It's simply the point at which the cat has accumulated enough evidence to update their internal prediction. For more severe cases, clinical trials found that fluoxetine combined with behavior modification produced significantly better outcomes than behavior modification alone. And separate studies found that treated cats shifted what researchers called their cognitive bias, their tendency to interpret ambiguous situations pessimistically toward a more neutral reading. The medication doesn't make them sleepy. It makes their brain more capable of forming new beliefs, which is the whole point. So here's what the cameras have been showing for decades. Some cats wait quietly. Some cats cycle through distress in 20-minute intervals for the entire duration of your absence. Some go silent in a way that looks fine and isn't, and almost none of them connect what they're experiencing to anything you did wrong, or anything you can fix with a toy or a diffuser. What they're responding to is the absence of a specific nervous system. Yours, the one their own nervous system has been calibrated against month by month, until your cortisol and theirs begin moving in the same direction. The cats that struggle most aren't badly trained. They just haven't yet learned, in their nervous system, not just their brain, that the door opening and the door closing are the same event, just in a different order. If this changed how you see what's happening while you're at work, subscribe and leave a comment. Does your cat show signs before you've even picked up your keys? A heartfelt thank you to all of you who have supported this journey. Thank you to everyone for the incredible support on the first video. This channel was created with so much love, hoping at least a handful of people might connect with it. But this level of response on the very first video was never expected. Thank you. This is only the beginning. See you in the next one.